But of course, we wouldn't be in AnyML if we would also kind of want to validate those assumptions with a little bit of research. So what we did is this is, by the way, ongoing research, and we'll write about it more in the next couple of weeks. But we basically pulled in the New York City yellow taxi data set, which is data from more than 12 years with regards to demand of taxis, yellow taxis in New York. And you can see here how this time series kind of is instantiated over time. Here we can see COVID, and we can see that the demand of the yellow taxi is going down over time. But then after COVID, it slightly resurfaces again. Of course, there is many reasons why demand is going down, because Uber has been introduced. There's also been the green taxi that has been introduced that takes the long trip. And also this demand is strongly dependent on the availability of taxi drivers, because the yellow cabs are the cabs that you hail and not the ones that you call. But this is very, very rich data. And basically for every hour, we have all the trips that happen in that hour. We know what the fare is. We know how many people were transported. We know from which location to another location. So there's lots of opportunity to create very, very advanced features and to really, really build out a demand forecasting use case on this data set. There's been research published about the degradation of machine learning models over time. Something, it's a really, really great paper if you want to delve into it. But what the premise is, we already talked about it a lot, but what the premise is that they basically take a data set like this one, and that they're just gonna sample different training periods, different histories, and then make predictions on different future data points. And they sample a certain age. So it might be that you train your data on this month, but then you make predictions 6 months later. And when you make those predictions, your model is 6 months old. And that is the age of the machine learning model. And when people have run these experiments, it's a very, very elaborate experiment setup. It's like 32 data sets from 4 different types of industries. The financial industry, there is like healthcare data sets in there. And then they built various types of machine learning models. And then for every data set, they're sampling this age and this training period, and then they're comparing the error between when it's making predictions and at the moment it was being trained. And then you can kind of get this relative error over time as the model becomes older. And there's very, very interesting things that came to light with this paper. And it's basically that 91% of models, they could degrade over time. And the older the model is, this is the model age in days, the older the model is, also the higher the error, and the variance of the error also goes up, which is very interesting. So that means the older a model is, the harder it is to kind of predict how certain models, because they built models with gradient boosting, with random forest, with recurrent neural nets, and rich regression. And they all react to aging differently, which is very, very interesting. And we try to kind of repeat this experiment, but then for the yellow taxi demand forecasting. So what we did here is we did the exact same thing where we specified like a small buffer, because that is like being used for the training data. We sample a training period or a deployment date. We look back 1 year in time, and then we measure the age, and then we predict here on a test set, and then we compare the performance relatively to the performance during training. And we can see that here for this specific demand forecasting use case, we can see that actually the performance is pretty stable. But then as the age come up and as we go to almost half a year of data, really the machine learning model starts deteriorating pretty heavily. And of course, there is many different experiments that you can run with this data set, because of course you can kind of look back and increase the historical window size, which we also did. So we ran the same experiment where we would take 1 year's worth of data of looking back, 2 years worth of data, and 3 years worth of data. And what's very interesting for this specific experiment, and we're going to repeat this experiment for many different demand forecasting use cases, that we can kind of get an idea of how to optimally retrain and how to and how aging manifests itself within this type of use cases. But you can actually see that if you do 2 years or 3 years worth of data, that you can actually lower the relative performance quite significantly. But that then the aging also happens faster. And this is very interesting because that means that you can probably increase the performance, the absolute performance, but that you will have to decrease or make your retraining intervals faster. And this is also something that is in line with what the other people have recommended with demand forecasting use cases, is to, if you look at the historical training window, is to first do an expansion window where you add more data over time. And then when you find the optimal window, to then slide it and not, and basically take 2 years of data or 1.5 years worth of data and then sliding it, as opposed to keeping expanding it, because you found the optimal point where adding more data from the past will not contain extra information. On the contrary, it might actually hurt the performance.